Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. I'm joined today by my buddy, David French. He is a New York Times bestselling author, senior editor at The Dispatch, and a columnist for The Atlantic. Now, in 2007 to 2008, he served with the 2nd Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Diyala Province, Iraq, where he was awarded the Bronze Star. David is an incredible author and insightful philosopher when it comes to the intersection of politics, culture, and faith. We get into that in spades in this upcoming conversation on the Michael Steele podcast. Stay tuned. Well, I finally got my brother in the house, none other than David French. David, welcome to the podcast, man. It's so good having you on board today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know, you're one of these guys, and I reference you in a lot of my talks, a lot of programs that I do. You're one of those writers who's a thinker, sort of a philosophizer, if you will, around culture, politics, and faith in a way that I think is not only timely, but necessary for a lot of folks to digest. You're one, to be honest, people don't know, you're one of the few people I actually pay to read.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear.
So I'm a subscriber. So I put my money where my faith in what you write is. And so I want to start with, because there's a lot there's just so much to get to with you, because you've touched on so many of these topics. But let's start with where you see the intersection of those three things: the culture, the politics, and faith right now, as we head into the summer and what will likely be a roiling fall campaign season.
Yeah, I see this intersection right now of culture, politics, and faith as extremely dysfunctional, and not from the standpoint of saying that, well, people of faith need to get out of politics. Not from that standpoint at all. Right. I mean, people of faith or no faith at all should engage in politics and should enter the public square with conviction. I think the problem that we have right now, if I had to sum it up, especially in the religious conservative world, is one of fear and panic.
Yeah.
That there's a constant view that it's 6 minutes to midnight, so to speak, if you're going to use like doomsday clock language, that our liberties hang by a thread, the place of the church in American life hangs by a thread, that Christian culture hangs by a thread, and that the next election could sever that thread. I remember debating Eric Metaxas, who's a pretty prominent evangelical author, in the run-up to the 2020 election, about whether Christians should support Donald Trump. And I took the position of no, he took the position of yes. And he kept saying, America's going to be over if Donald Trump loses. And we had an event at John Brown University, a Christian college in Northwest Arkansas, great place. And he was saying, well, if Donald Trump doesn't win, we can't even have events like this. Well, that's absurd. It's ridiculous.
Where does that come from? Where do they have this notion that America is going to be over? And this is my kicker. They seemingly don't understand or want to see that what they're doing is on the path to ending America as we know it.
Well, if you take the Flight 93, there was this essay written by a guy named Michael Anton in the run-up to the 2016 election, this is the Flight 93 election. You have to charge the cockpit or we're going to die.
Right.
Another version of the America is over thesis. Number one, our liberties are not that fragile. If we're one election away from extinction as a country, it's already too late.
We're kind of toast,
because you're not going to win all the rest of them, right? I mean, it's already too late. But the very sense of emergency can create its own crisis. This is what you're saying, Michael, and this is where I'm getting into some of the dysfunctional relationships that now exist between religion and politics. If you have a religious community moving into the public square with an apocalyptic view of the stakes, that by itself can be deeply destabilizing. Now, that's not millions of Christians. That's probably not even most people who would describe themselves as evangelical, but a core group of people, very vocal, very active, really are approaching American politics with an apocalyptic view. And the comparison I've used in the Flight 93 context, these people think that the plane's going to go down, that America's going to go down, and so they got to charge in, they got to take over the pilots from the pilots and grab the controls of the plane. And what if you charge in, you take control of the plane, and the plane wasn't going down, it was just turbulence. And then you're like, oh crap.
Okay, I got to fly this now.
What are we doing now? And in a lot of ways, that was sort of my assessment of the Trump years. Is you charge the cockpit, you put a manifestly unfit person in charge of the country, and it was 4 years of oh crap moments, culminating in this election contest, the Stop the Steal effort, and January 6th, and really the closest we've come to a massive constitutional crisis since 1876 at the least, and maybe even since 1861.
So let's talk about a few passengers on that plane, because you've written about them, and I want to recall for folks a piece that you wrote back in November of last year entitled "The Moral Collapse of America's Largest Christian University," where you began to focus in a number of essays even before that one, looking at this intersection in particular between the white evangelicalism, which I think you got to be very precise about, because it's very different when I talk to Black evangelicals, and this political wasteland of zero-sum reality. You talk about it at the university level. You wrote a piece, another one, which I thought was even more profound as that one, and it was getting more Christians into politics is the wrong Christian goal, because that seems to be the outgrowth narrative from the passengers on the plane. Is like, well, we just need to get more passengers on the plane. No. Yeah,
it's our butt needs to be in the pilot's seat, right?
Exactly.
And so the reason why I wrote that piece is this is after news began to emerge of some of the Mark Meadows text messages and the communications that are occurring at the highest levels of the Trump administration in the run up to January 6th. And one of the things that struck me about it is, here you had, one of Trump's lead lawyers, a woman named Jenna Ellis, outspoken evangelical; Mark Meadows, chief of staff, outspoken evangelical; Josh Hawley, outspoken evangelical; Ted Cruz, outspoken. You just go down the line, and you began to realize, wait a minute, there was a time when I was growing up, if you told me, hey, in 20 years or 30 years, well, shoot, I'm older. I'm so old that I was done growing up 20 years ago, but 40 years, 35
My
years
wife
ago,
would say I'm still working on it, but that's another conversation.
I was 20 years ago, I was very much an adult, not done growing up. But let's say 35 years ago, you said when I was a teenager, fast forward to 2020, and you're going to have devout evangelicals in all of these key positions. I would have said, score, that's great for America. But the reality is these people were using their positions of power to undermine our Constitution and attempt to overthrow a lawful election. One of the more grotesque attacks on our constitutional structure that we've seen in generations, all engineered by outspoken evangelical Christians who are operating under the sense that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing as Christians in that moment. And that's when I said, wait a minute, in my piece, it is not about whether you're going to get a Christian in charge. It's about whether justice will be done. And justice can be done, because the scripture says justice isn't really optional. I mean, this famous verse, Micah 6:8, says, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before the Lord your God. So you got to pursue justice. But the pursuit of justice is not the same thing as the pursuit of power.
Right.
And we have to really understand that distinction, because the way politics often works is you say, well, I can't even achieve justice unless I have power. So the pursuit of power then trumps everything else.
Well, but we know that's a lie,
Right.
because arguably Dr. King didn't have power.
Not much.
Not much, as
Rosa
he's sitting
Parks
in that Birmingham
Rosa Parks
jail.
did not,
right? Yeah, he did not
Yeah.
much power, yet he was able to pursue that justice. So in your view, is it a corruption of faith, or is it a corruption of politics, or are they corrupting each other to such a degree that it's playing out the way it is?
Yes to all. You know, so one thing is there's a sort of a loss of faith in the sense that says, I am needed in this position to forestall disaster. So a lot of what ends up happening is people start to view themselves and view their, either their values, view themselves as,
right.
sort of indispensable to national flourishing, which is, a high view of yourself and kind of a lower view of the sovereignty of God. The scripture is very clear if you're talking about who's sovereign over the course of nations, and it's not presidents, it's not chiefs of staff, it's not attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start to view yourself as sort of the indispensable actor, and that it's a national tragedy if you are not in the room where it happens, to use the language from Hamilton, well, there's kind of a failure of sort of faith and a failure of humility, quite frankly, because you're thinking of yourself as more important than you are. Then there's a lot of this is a really kind of a failure of faith, in the sense of the overwhelming sense of fear that pervades much of the religious community is not rooted in sort of a biblical worldview. I mean, the Apostle Paul. No. The Apostle Paul says quite clearly to Timothy, and God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power. And here he's talking in the 1st century AD. So it's not political power,
right?
Faith in the power of God, of power, of love. And here's the last one: sound mind. Sound mind. And think about how many people went down the conspiracy rabbit hole. So a lot of this is a failure of faith, in the sense that is rooted. You see the evidence of that failure of faith in all of the fear.
You make such an excellent point there. And for myself, coming out of a Catholic tradition and a monastic one as a Augustinian seminarian, the emphasis on the value and the power of one's faith to be that guidepost in all things is a very powerful one. In fact, it was one that animated my time when I was in office as lieutenant governor. It animated me even as a political operative inside the GOP, where they would want me to say or do certain things that were against my set of values or principles, meaning, go out there and say Barack Obama is a Nigerian from, whatever, and he wasn't born here and all that crap. And I said, I'll go after him on healthcare, but I'm not going to go after him on something I know to be a lie just to score the political point. There seems to be no line drawn any further when it comes to using your faith as a hammer against others, using it as an excuse for your own bad behavior, and then wrapping yourself not only in the flag, but in the Bible, which is one of the problems I have with a lot of evangelical Christians who, after looking at the apostasy that was Donald and is Donald Trump, that they embrace that, where they go into the Oval Office and they lay hands on this man, referring to him as the modern day Moses and all of that. I'm sitting there going, where did I get on to your last point? Where did I lose my mind? Where did my sound mind become unsound, that I'm the one who's looking at this and going, there's something wrong, when everyone else is saying that this is right? How do we reconcile all of that today? How do we put our heads around a segment, and a growing segment, of our neighbors, our friends and family members that are embracing this form of?
Yeah, it's a great question. Here's my best answer to it. One is, there has been a woefully deficient job. There's a woefully deficient job being done in the concept of it within spiritual formation of a political theology. And by that, I mean, not how, what issues should Christians care about? And this is something that there are all kinds of ministries and nonprofits out there telling, especially white evangelicals, you should care about religious liberty. You should care about abortion.
Right.
So that it's very issue focused. It is not focused on the how you interact. It is focused on the what what you're pursuing, which is different from many other areas of Christian life. So if you're talking to a Christian businessman, for example, and all the ministries that reach Christian businessmen, they're not saying, here's what it means to be a Christian businessman. You need to make a lot of money. Well, I mean, if you're a Christian businessman, you do want to make a profit, right?
Right.
But the ministry is all about, this is how you are a Christian as a employee or as a boss. It's how you treat your customers. It's how you treat your colleagues. It's how you treat your superiors, your subordinates. It's all about the way in which you interact with the world. Same thing with like a Christian student. It's not all about getting all A's. It's about how do you treat your professors? How do you treat your peers? But in politics, there's no real education in what does it mean to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, which is the marker of Christian character: love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. How do you exhibit that in politics? No, the teaching is all about how do you win on abortion or how do you win on religious liberty. And so a lot of Christians sort of fall into the ends justify the means, which is completely contrary to Scripture. While Scripture will tell you that there are certain just outcomes you should pursue, it will also tell you that there is a way in which you should pursue it.
Right.
So through that, that kindness and humility are not optional; they're mandatory.
Well, and in the Catholic tradition, a lot of that, the way you pursue it is sort of embodied in a theological understanding about a preferential treatment for the poor. So in all things you do, keep in mind those who do not have. As Christ reminded us, you will always have the poor amongst you, right? So this idea that in all that you do not lose sight of your fellow man and woman who is not in a position to help themselves, or where the institutions are weighted against them. So you do have that reminder of the servant mission, in public service, which for me, a lot of this, David, really kind of falls down on the kind of men and women we have lifted up into leadership. Yeah. And those, as I say all the time, and I've said from the very beginning of my political career, that these men and women are an extension of us. They reflect our values, our set of, even when they're at cross purposes, the idea is that they're in this space recognizing this diverse spirit and idea and effort. And that piece of it seems to have fallen down dramatically, where our leaders are actually in many cases worse than our worst screaming crowd in the corner. They're just they're sort of playing to that mob. How do you see this country addressing that? Do we give up on just trying to find those good leaders and positioning them? Do we find a few and that's it? I mean, how do we turn that corner when the Marjorie Taylor Greene types seem to be the go-to, certainly on the Republican side, but then you have the same devil dancing on the other side as well.
So let me give you the optimistic and the pessimistic.
Okay, I'm up for that.
So let me start with the pessimistic, and then we'll go optimistic.
I prefer that. That's a good way to go.
Okay, so the pessimistic take is that we're in a terrible spiral because what's happening is our politics are becoming so toxic And not just at the leader level. I'm talking about at the grassroots level. If you post something and you're a listener to this podcast and you're not somebody who's terribly political, you don't have a public voice, and you just post an opinion on your Facebook page, odds are you might just get lit up by some of your friends and family members. And it's like experience a kind of like a electric shock. It's like, it's a culture that is shocking people whenever they disagree. And so what's ending up happening is large numbers of good people are just pulling away. They're just withdrawing.
That is true. They are. And
so what's happening is, as the group More in Common is detailed, we have this group of people called the exhausted majority. And there are people on the left and the middle and the right who are sick of it all, but they're not exerting their will. They're not saying they're not using their majority status to sort of say, enough, I am done with this extremism. We are done. They're just pulling away. So that's the pessimistic case, that they just keep pulling away. The optimistic case is that they decide to lean in, that this exhausted majority goes from being exhausted to being a majority, and the majority becomes the most important point. And we're actually seeing some signs of that. So
really, please detail for me.
I'll give you two great examples.
I'm worn out, man.
Yeah. I'll give you two great examples. Georgia primary.
Okay.
And the San Francisco recalls. So one on the right, one on the left. So in the Georgia primary, unlike a lot of these Republican primaries around the country where we've had a bunch of candidates and then the Trump endorsement can make a real big difference among, when the vote is split a bunch of different ways, like J.D. Vance in Ohio or Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. In Georgia, it was like mano y mano. It was the Trump endorsed election steal candidate against a GOP establishment figure who had resisted the steal.
Mm-hmm.
And in both the Georgia gubernatorial election, where Kemp really kind of just sort of kept Trump at arm's length, and won by 50. And then in the Secretary of State race, where Raffensperger, who took Trump on directly, won by 20. That was sort of the exhausted majority waking up and saying, enough with this stolen election nonsense. Let's elect people who actually govern and are focused on our state and our needs. So that's on the right. Now, of course, we still have incidents like, Trump's endorsement making a big difference, as I said, in places like Pennsylvania or Ohio, but Georgia's a sign of optimism. Now let's move over to San Francisco. San Francisco, they just recalled these radical school board officials, and they're about to recall the radical progressive prosecutor. And this is not a conservative revolt in San Francisco. This is progressive saying, enough. Let's focus on quality schools and not, at one point, the San Francisco Unified School District had a plan to rename a bunch of schools, but it had no plan to open the schools in the pandemic. I mean, where are your priorities, right? And so you're seeing some signs both in the right, where Georgia conservatives, nobody would say this is the left that did this in Georgia. It was Georgia conservatives rejected the Stop the Steal movement. And then nobody says it's Fox News viewers who are doing this in San Francisco. So you're seeing two different wings of the exhausted majority, one in San Francisco, one in Georgia, who are saying enough. Now, those are like 2 points of light amidst a lot of darkness.
A lot of dark.
But they show what's possible, right? They show what's possible.
They do. So we're gonna slide out for a moment, take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna put some of that light and dark to the test on some of the more pressing issues that are in front of us now and will likely be in front of us in the next few weeks as the Supreme Court comes full circle on its as it closes out its year. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with David French right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to Michael Steele Podcast. I'm Michael Steele, and we're having this great conversation with a guy I have a great deal of admiration for. I've known David a long time, have the pleasure of working with him in the democracy space on a couple of things, and I just enjoy his writing. I would highly recommend folks you check out his work. You can get it online. The Dispatch, it's wonderful. Sign up. I don't pay for a lot. but I pay for this one,
And I appreciate it.
It's worth it. And I highly recommend for your reading. And it gives you some really cross-section insights on a lot of things. So David, you wrote a piece that came out this past Sunday, which again, I wait for your Sunday your Sunday sermons, and this one was against gun idolatry, and it really struck a chord with me as someone who has always been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I do not currently own a weapon, even though I have a license to own. I don't own a weapon. And I got the license because people out here crazy, and I may need to get one. But you talk, I think, very profoundly about this American gun culture. Walk us through how you see that right now, particularly in light of Uvalde, the killing of the innocents there, the shootings in Buffalo, the hate-filled killing of African Americans at a supermarket. What does that say about not so much the gun culture, but about us as a country?
Yeah. I mean, let's just put it out there. A healthy culture does not produce mass shootings like this. Now, I mean, I can imagine that even in a healthy culture, when you have 330 million people, 320 million people, that on occasion you're going to have something horrible happen, even in a healthy culture, but not at this level of frequency.
Right.
Not at this level of frequency. And so, one of the things that I think there's sort of two tracks to look at this. One is a very practical track that says, what are the policy measures that we can implement that can start to do something about this crisis? That's a sort of very practical, pragmatic. And then the other one is there what's going on that's deeper? What's going on that's deeper? And this is where you get into, if you look at like a lot of the mass killers, rarely will you see a positive father figure in their lives.
Right.
So that's one thing. Another thing you'll often see is, people who've been sort of crying out that they're in distress for years and yet never received the help that they need. And that's another sort of bigger, deeper thing. But there's also something going on that I wanted to talk about in America's gun culture more broadly. And that is a shift, not everywhere, and not even with most people, but a really obvious shift in my mind away from a view of a gun as an instrument of self-defense that is, you're grateful to have the right to possess for self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
But really, honestly, it's kind of a manifestation of a lot of sad and terrible things that you have to have one. Like my family has been under threat. So we own weapons.
Mm-hmm.
We own guns to protect ourselves. But I don't walk around open carrying.
Right.
You're not going to see Christmas cards with our family's arsenal. You're not going to see. Tree. And so what I talk about in this, there's a difference between valuing a right as a means of self-defense versus celebrating a right as a means of defiance. And then what ends up happening when the gun becomes an instrument not of defense, but mainly of defiance, it is inherently intimidating. It's inherently destabilizing to constantly introduce weaponry into conversations about politics. And so what I traced was sort of what's happened in parts of the right is you'll see some of these, like Lauren Boebert will be on TV with crossed AR-15s behind her head.
Right.
Marjorie Taylor Greene raffles off a 50 caliber sniper rifle. Ted Cruz shoots a semi-automatic rifle so much that he cooks bacon on its barrel, and then you move into things like advertisements that are telling men that they're not, that you get your man card back if you have an AR-15, to talk about some advertisements for the guns that were used in Sandy Hook, or this Daniel Defense ad that says, train up a child in the way he should go and he will not depart, and when he is older, he will not depart from it, which is a Bible verse, but it's showing a very young child with an AR-15. Or you're talking about this increased in armed protests. In other words, people protesting outside somebody's home with AR-15s or protesting at state capitals with AR-15s. And this is something very different from a self-defense mindset. This is a defiance mindset, and it's a defiance that is combined with intimidation and threat and menace. And I think that that's a very, very negative turn in the larger gun culture itself.
Right. You make the point, which the sentence actually, I read it twice when I read it, because I couldn't believe you put it in, you said it out loud, but then you put it in print, and that it was something that I have been saying for quite some time, and actually related not just to guns, but to a lot of the pro-life narrative that has kind of gotten off of the train, which we'll get to some of your writings on that. But you say, no, the threat to America's gun culture comes from the gun rights movement itself. The threat is gun idolatry, a form of gun fetish that's fundamentally aggressive, grotesquely irresponsible, and potentially destabilizing to American democracy. What is the response to that? I mean, what do you think? How do people hear that? I mean, are them fighting words? Are those? To me, they were words like, yes. Now, can we begin to address the problem? Can we begin?
Michael, it's so funny, because whenever I write something that's sort of taking aim at a manifestation of the populist reactionary right, what I see is two kinds of reactions happen simultaneously. One is the Twitter reaction.
Right. Yes.
People get very, very angry. Very, very angry. The other one is the reaction in my inbox, people emailing me privately. And there it's very different. It is, thank you. You've put into words something that I've been trying to sort of figure out. And I actually
sent you an email on one of those the writings that you did, and you just struck a curve, and you were like, I was like, no, brother, you got it right. Keep charging.
And I appreciate that those messages a ton. So that's the difference, is a lot of times when you inject an idea into Twitter, right, it immediately activates the wings, the high, the people, the most polarized people. They get activated and very defensive. But as I said, there's this big exhausted majority, and included in that exhausted majority are millions of gun owners who value the Second Amendment, believes that the Second Amendment provides a personal right of self-defense, but are really uncomfortable with this turn that the gun rights movement has taken, that celebrates things like the tactical lifestyle or the black gun lifestyle, right, or really uncomfortable with the unwillingness to even consider innovative policy solutions like red flag laws, because anything that pulls back any aspect of gun rights is seen to be when the reality is the gun rights movement is one of the most successful legal and political movements of our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the expansion of gun rights over the last 40 years, it's pretty remarkable.
But can I put a little asterisk there and draw that out a little point? Because I think it's important for people to understand. You talk about the gun rights movement. Was there ever a point in the 19th century, the 20th century, or even in the early 21st century, where there was a movement to take people's guns from them nationally, just a national, you know what, y'all just, despite the Second Amendment, y'all just not gonna own guns anymore? Because a lot of this whole holding my gun closer to me than my God, which I have a real offense with the whole, pro-life, pro-God, pro-gun quote. When I hear people say that, I just want to smack the crap out of them. I'll be kind of say something more genteel than I would otherwise say on my podcast. But what is it that animated that movement, that while you say it was the most successful, to the eyes of a lot of us, it's been one of the most damaging and most dangerous things today? So it started out right, but somewhere somebody put the caboose on first, and I don't,
Well,
just really messed up the train.
There's a long history of gun control in this country that is now, if you're going to frame it as a national effort to take away guns, I think in the most recent, I think if you're going to look back at national efforts, there was an effort that spawned out of the Prohibition era crime waves that dealt with, for example, fully automatic weapons.
Right. So that's how they got rid of the Tommy gun and all of that.
Right. Which was quite successful. Fully automatic weapons are not a factor in crime in the United States, but there is a pretty shameful history of gun control when it comes to trying to take guns out of the hands of Black Americans.
Right.
So there is a history out there of gun control as a method of essentially as a gun control as a handmaiden to racial violence. And so there was an enormous amount of racial violence for a lot of Black Americans. Their only real line of defense wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't the sheriff. It was the rifle that they possessed. And so there's a long and shameful history of racism in American gun control. But if you're moving forward more in a more modern perspective, the real battle, there's been a battle on a couple of fronts. One is, can I carry a weapon in self-defense? Regardless of whether it's a semi-automatic, a gun or a semi-automatic handgun or say a revolver, can I carry a weapon in self-defense? And most of America for a long time had various gun control laws in place that made it very difficult, if not impossible, for you to carry a gun in self-defense. Now, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe that the Second Amendment says you get to keep and bear arms. Okay. And so that means you do have a right to carry a weapon for self-defense. And that's been one of the more successful legal movements to open up the ability to carry a weapon for self-defense. And so you've seen an enormous amount of success there. And you've seen really when it came to, so there was an assault weapons ban that was put in place in 1994 for a period of 10 years. That was national. And when it lapsed, it was not renewed, and there was no real constituency to renew it. And so, one of the things that is kind of, if I had to say something there that bothers me about two movements that I've been a part of for much of my life. So I've been a Second Amendment advocate my entire adult life. I've also been an advocate of religious liberty my entire adult life. Both of those movements, by the way, are remarkably legally successful. And yet the rhetoric surrounding both of them is always still the 6 minutes to midnight stuff. So to take religious liberty, there hasn't been a serious religious liberty loss at the Supreme Court for more than a decade. And yet you still get that 6 minutes to midnight rhetoric. With gun rights, the success of the gun rights movement over 25, 30 years is remarkable. And yet you'll still get 6 minutes to midnight rhetoric, which I think to an awful lot of people who are looking at what can we do about mass shootings. And if you say, I'm even close to red flag laws, because we can't give an inch,
What do those look like for you? What do those red flag laws look like for you? And if they're passed, how do you enforce them?
Yeah. So red flag laws, pretty easy to describe. What they do is they give a person, whether they're say a family member, a school principal, an employer, a police officer, the ability to go to court and say, Michael has shown through Instagram posts or comments that he's given to me or whatever, that he's a danger to himself or others. And I'm asking for a temporary order to go in and seize his firearms and prevent him from purchasing any more firearms until the order lapses or is lifted. And the reason for that law, one, it's just a good idea if somebody is exhibiting behavior that that they're a threat to them, or them, threat to themselves or others, that you don't want them having a gun. That's just a matter of common sense. But the other thing is, we have 50 years. This is really sad, but we have 50 years of study of mass killings in the U.S. And an National Institute for Justice funded study showed that in most mass killings, the killer leaked their plans publicly before they pulled the trigger. Well, if we know in most of these mass killings, the killer leaked their plans publicly, it makes a lot of sense to implement a legal measure that can give principals, parents, police officers an ability to seize guns as soon as those plans are leaked. And now, it's not that you can predict if somebody's going to be a mass killer. It's just that you can see and observe if someone has exhibited behavior that indicates that they are not fit to own a weapon at this point. Maybe they need to get mental health services. Maybe they, maybe they never need to have a gun. But the idea that when somebody is exhibiting behavior that indicates they're a threat to themselves or others, then it makes all the sense in the world to seize their weapons. Now, with due process, with a burden of proof, with a sunset period so that it's not indefinite. But these make a lot of sense. And unfortunately, a lot of gun advocates are still in the position of no, even that small encroachment is too much.
So you and I are conservatives cut out of a very similar cloth. And how do you approach, or how do you think conservatives today, and I'm not just talking about, those inside the Republican Party, but more broadly speaking, because you and I know that there are a lot of Democrat and independent conservatives out there. There's a philosophy. There's maybe even a theology to some degree for them. How do you see approaching those individuals in the face of, some of the things that we've been talking about that have been, in some cases, hijacked? I mean, your approach to dealing with the Second Amendment, or dealing with, and I read some of your writing. I'm always curious when you write about abortion because of not just the politics, but more importantly, theology, because that's what drives me more on it than anything else. But then you're always trying to find ways, not you personally, but I know I am always trying to find the words and the way to express this so that people can not be blinded by just the political, like you said, the Twitter reaction.
Yeah.
How do we get beyond the Twitter reaction so that there's this, like my mama would put it, there's more common sense at play than there is anything else?
Yeah. So I think of it after years and years of dealing with the Twitter reaction and sort of the way our public discourse is so dominated by extreme voices. What I realize, and what people have to realize, is there are a segment of people who are unpersuadable. Okay. They're just unpersuadable. Right. And the fact that unpersuadable people aren't persuaded, I mean, you can't worry about that, but there are persuadable people.
I actually had to pause there for a moment and go, yeah, that's right. They're not persuadable.
Yeah. But there's an awful lot of persuadable people out there, and they often happen to be not the most vocal.
Right.
All right. So you're aiming your communication at persuadable people, and you're trying to do two things at once, both persuade them and fortify them. Okay. So persuade them that the position that you're taking is the best available position, and also fortify them to deal with the very angry unpersuadables, because they can be in agreement with you, but if they don't say anything, if they don't support politicians who support that position, it's as if they don't exist. And this goes back to our conversation earlier. We're talking about this exhausted majority. If it just stays exhausted and doesn't exert its will as a majority, then you're kind of lost. But if you can persuade people and fortify people to have courage to confront the unpersuadable, radicalized wings, you've got a real chance. And you've got even more of a chance than you think, because the persuadable people are a bigger group in many ways. Not on every issue, but on many, many issues, they're a bigger group.
Well, that I'm going to work on my persuadable portion there.
Yeah.
David French, I really appreciate you taking a moment, man. I could go on for hours with you, because there are a lot of things that we didn't even touch the surface on that I wanted to get to as well. But wanted to appreciate and value your time. I know how that can be, but I thank you very much. He is a New York Times best-selling author. When is your next book coming out? Are you working on something right now?
I don't have one coming at the moment. My last book came out September 2020 called Divided We Fall, about America possibly splitting in two. And so
Ooh.
that was, writing a book is a tiring thing. So
It's exhaustive.
yeah, I'm still recovering.
But check out his writings, folks. Even if you don't have a chance to get the book, check out the Dispatch, where you'll find a lot of current thinking by David on a host of issues. You'll also see his work in the Atlantic, and make sure you check that out. You can follow him on Twitter at David French, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
At David A. French.
David A. French. That's
Yes.
right. David A. French.
If you follow at David French, you'll get a lobbyist for the National Retail Federation. And
that's right. I remember that now. Yeah. I made that mistake really early on.
He sometimes gets my hatred, and I feel bad for him.
Yes. Yeah. The same for all the Michael Steeles out there. I feel for you, brothers. Let me tell you. So, but folks, I do appreciate David coming by. I appreciate you stopping in. If you like this podcast, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us. And you can find me on Twitter at Michael Steele, and certainly follow the podcast itself on at Steele_podcast. So until next time, be safe, be well, stay informed, follow and read gentlemen and individuals like David French. And until next time, peace out.